What if studying ancient art could reveal the origins of language itself? Not language as sound or script, but as structure, the capacity to relate, to transmit, to preserve meaning across generations. Scattered across 3 distant and seemingly unconnected sites, deep beneath a mountain in Mesoamerica, across the sun-bleached stones of the Arabian Peninsula, and along the cliffs of a desert outcrop, remarkably similar images appear. A large human-like figure paired with a smaller counterpart, a visible line or conduit linking them, and a recurring trident-shaped or forked symbol, always deliberate, always placed. Individually, these elements could be dismissed as conventional, even accidental. But when they recur together, across continents and millennia, the pattern begins to resist coincidence. It suggests not imitation, but convergence. Not communication between cultures, but a shared logic beneath them. Why a rope between figures? Why always a pair, unequal in size or posture? Why the trident, 3 points bound at the base, rendered not as ornament but as structure? These may not just be works of ancient art. They may be the earliest evidence of something far more enduring. A visual grammar of meaning, older than writing, deeper than myth, and still legible today. Could there have been a deeper symbolic system at work, one that does not depend on language as we know it, yet conveys relationships, transformations, or hierarchies of meaning? And can we decipher it? We do not presume to answer these questions outright. Instead, we follow the pattern that the images themselves suggest, first by observing what recurs, then by examining each instance in detail, and finally by considering what larger structures, cognitive, symbolic, or otherwise, might be encoded in the stones and images they left behind. We will explore 3 sites, thousands of miles, and belonging to cultural worlds with no known contact. First, an examination of Yuxtlahuaca Cave, located in the highlands of Guerrero, Mexico, which contains some of the oldest known cave paintings in the Americas. Suspected to be active between 1200 and 400 BCE, the site combines pigment-based murals, carved pathways, and human remains in a complex spatial arrangement. Though associated with early Olmec influence, its symbolic program stands apart, marked by precision, restraint, and intent. And then we will travel to the other side of the world, the Middle East. Bir Hima, in the southern Arabian Peninsula, is part of a dense rock art region once situated along key trade and migration routes. Its petroglyphs, carved directly into stone without pigment or ornament, date from the Neolithic through the early historic period. Figures at Bir Hima are schematic but deliberate, capturing human and symbolic forms in stark, balanced compositions. Jubba, farther north in the deserts of Saudi Arabia, is one of the richest prehistoric art sites in the region. Carvings here may date back over 7,000 years and span multiple cultural phases. Unlike the enclosed space of Yuxtlahuaca or the judgmental stillness of Bir Hima, Jubba's compositions are expansive, reflective and exposed, carved into open rock faces that seem meant for contemplation. These sites differ in time, technique and terrain, but across all 3, they point toward a shared mythology, a common structure of thought and a common language. Of the 3 sites examined in this study, Yuxtlahuaca Cave offers us the clearest and most elaborate material expression. Its rock art is not incised, but painted in red and black pigment, marking a significant advancement in symbolic media. It incorporates not only image but choreographed space, corridors, carved pathways, and human remains arranged in sequence. And perhaps most notably, Yuxtlahuaca is also the most recent of the 3 sites in terms of activity. While still ancient, likely in use between 1200 and 400 BCE, it preserves the actual bodies of the dead, embedded in mineral formations and preserved by the slow hand of geological time. For these reasons, its relative recency, its technical complexity, and its spatial layering, we begin here. Not because it tells the whole story, but because it tells it in full form. Yuxtlahuaca does not gesture toward a pattern, it enacts it. It is not merely a site of image, but a diagram in space, laid out in a sequence that compels not just observation, but participation. To enter is to move through a series of transformations, each step drawing the visitor deeper into meaning. But before any interpretation can take place, we must begin where the journey itself begins, with the descent. The cave does not announce itself. Its entrance is narrow, unobtrusive, tucked into the limestone ridges of Guerrero's highlands. From the outside, nothing suggests what lies within, but to step inside is to begin a directed passage, not a wandering, but a path with a shape. Roughly halfway into the cave's interior, the visitor encounters a corridor flanked by human remains. These are not scattered bones or accidental burials. They are bodies, multiple, placed in upright or seated positions, and over time their soft tissue has calcified beneath slow drips of water, becoming part of the cave itself. Their forms are partial now, ribs, skulls, pelvises, but their presence is unmistakable. The dead here are standing watch, not resting. They do not line the walls like decorations, they inhabit the path like markers. This is not a chamber of mourning, it is a passage of witnesses. Past them, the cave narrows and then flattens. Carved directly into the red clay floor is a trench, long, straight and singular, running forward for nearly 800 meters. It is not a natural feature, it is man-made, cut with precision and intent. It follows no vein of water, reveals no signs of habitation, and serves no obvious mechanical purpose. It is not deep, but it is deliberate. It leads, and it leads only forward. At the trench's end, the cave opens again, and here we find the paintings, large, richly coloured figures rendered in iron oxide reds and soot-based blacks. The images are carefully placed on flat, prominent walls, clearly meant to be seen by those who made it this far. There is no distraction in this chamber, no clutter of marks, no accumulation of graffiti or overlaid layers. Just 3 focused compositions. A large figure with a rope extending to a smaller human, a feathered serpent, and a solar jaguar exhaling flame or light. At this point, before we ask what any of it means, we can say something simple and undeniable. Someone or some group placed their dead in sequence, carved a long channel, and brought their audience, then as now, to a set of images waiting at the end. The pattern, even without interpretation, begins to emerge. A people left behind their dead. They marked a trail into the earth, and they left a message at the end. From this realization, the journey changes. What began as observation becomes quest. If there is a message here, then something was meant to be understood. The task now is not only to look, but to listen, to follow the rope not just across stone, but through meaning. At the terminus of the trench, the cave opens not into a chaotic collage of figures, but into a deliberate arrangement. 3 mural panels, 3 distinct forms, each composed with clarity, placed with intention, and separated just enough to command individual attention, yet aligned as if meant to be read together. In form, in colour, and in orientation, they compose a triad. Not merely 3 images, but a system of transmission, rendered in pigment and stone. Let us take them in order of symbolic movement. The first image is powerful in its simplicity. A large feline form, clearly a jaguar, its back marked with black rosettes, spots identifying it unmistakably as a predatory cat of Mesoamerica. The body is coloured in deep red pigment, recalling solar light, heat, blood, or divinity. It is not a passive image. Its mouth is open, and from it a line or tongue of fire emerges, a flame, a breath, or a word. This is not a hunting animal. It is a solar being, a god not in repose but in speech. This figure does not act physically. It emanates, it speaks. It projects force not through claw or fang, but through expression, the fire of meaning. And so the image establishes its position, source, origin, authority. Not the first in time, necessarily, but the first in function. The voice that begins the chain. Near the jaguar, another figure, radically different in form, yet no less commanding. A serpent, winding and sinuous, but not of the earth. It is winged, its head adorned with a crown or feathered crest. This is not a snake. It is Quetzalcoatl, or an early form of the figure we have come to know by that name, a creature not just of earth and sky, but of transition between them, a messenger, a conveyor. There is movement in the image, curling, directional, flowing. It does not speak as the jaguar does, but it carries. The implication is unmistakable. A message is in motion. The fire spoken in the first panel now begins to travel, not as sound, but as structure. It moves not on legs, but on wings. It coils through the middle space between God and human. The second figure, then, is mediator. Not creator, not recipient, but conduit. The third image, largest, most detailed, and most enigmatic, dominates the chamber. A human figure, clearly male, painted in red and black, stands facing the second, smaller human figure. He wears an elaborate costume, likely of jaguar skin, evoking not just the animal's appearance, but its incorporation. This is not imitation, it is embodiment. This figure has been the subject of varied interpretation. One persistent misreading sees a tail between the legs, a curved projection that, upon closer inspection, is almost certainly a phallus, adorned like the limbs with tats or glyphs, basic signs or marks of power. The phallus is no incidental detail. It identifies the figure not merely as male, but as generative. This is a man receiving, yes, but also transmitting forward. Every appendage of this figure is marked. Arms, legs, and phallus bear tattooed or painted glyphs, each like a node of significance. He is not blank, he is inscribed. In one hand he holds an object, perhaps a whip, a staff, or a rope. The form is ambiguous, but the gesture is active. He is not passive, not worshipful, not in awe. He is in possession of something. He has been given something. He is the recipient, but not the endpoint. And thus the final image completes the sequence. If the jaguar speaks and the serpent delivers, the man receives and becomes the carrier. In their order and form, the three figures offer no single narrative, but a relational progression. The jaguar initiates, the serpent moves, the man accepts, fire becomes flight, becomes flesh. It is a chain of transformation, not in mythic time, but in symbolic function. At this stage, we do not need to declare what is being passed, whether knowledge, power, structure, or memory. It is enough to say something is transmitted, from divine source through winged movement into marked human form. The mural sequence mirrors the cave's journey. One begins with death and silence, passes through a trench of orientation, and arrives not at worship, but at inheritance. The man who stands in the final panel is not a follower. He is not bowing. He is marked, armed, and watching. He has heard, and now he holds. At first glance, the painting of the large human figure, often called the ruler in academic shorthand, appears to show a dyad, a tall, richly adorned man standing over a smaller human, seated or crouched before him. But on closer inspection, once the visual grammar of the cave has begun to reveal itself, this image too opens, showing not two, but three interlinked figures, and not a static scene, but a chain of transmission. The central figure is large, commanding, richly clothed. He wears not only a jaguar skin, but beneath it, a garment of orange and yellow horizontal stripes, a serape, carefully painted and visually distinct. His arms and legs are marked with glyphic tattoos, and what was previously mistaken for a tail is clearly a phallus, similarly adorned. He is not just decorated, he is inscribed. In his right hand he holds what may be a whip or rope, assertive, dynamic. But it is his left hand, subtle and easy to miss, that holds the key. From it extends a small trident-shaped object, directly toward the smaller figure before him. The gesture is precise. This is not attack or command, it is offering. Below him sits a smaller human, crouched or seated on the ground. The figure's posture suggests reception, attention, an apprentice, a child, or a recipient of knowledge. On the lower half of the figure are two small arched forms, subtle but deliberate. These are not legs and not clothing. When viewed in relation to the ruler's rope-bearing arm, it becomes clear. One arch is the point of entry, where the rope arrives. The other is the point of exit, where the rope continues toward us. This small figure is not a dead end. He is a transmission node, a point along a path. He receives from the ruler, and he transmits outward, from the painted stone toward the living viewer. This is not a scene of dominance. It is a relay, and then to the side, almost an afterthought, easily mistaken for a vessel or decorative element, appears a third figure, once seen and never again mistaken. Just behind the ruler's head sits what looks like a small orange pot, bearing two horizontal bands, the exact pattern of the ruler's serape in miniature. From this pot grows what at first looks like grass or vegetation, but on closer view, this grass resolves into hair, and within it, a face, two small eyes, a nose, a shape unmistakably human. This is not pottery. It is a head, the ruler's ancestor, or origin. It is made of the same visual grammar as the ruler himself. Same stripes, same orientation, same position. And between them, painted as part of the ruler's striped cloak, is a rope connecting the two. The message is now clear. The ruler does not stand alone. He is not a source, but a recipient, just like the small figure before him. He receives from the head behind, his ancestor, and passes to the figure below, his heir. Within a single painted panel, the triadic logic of Yuxtlahuaca is fully and explicitly embodied. The ancestor stands behind, silent but connected. The ruler stands in the center, marked, clothed, and linked in both directions. The small human sits before him, receiving what the ruler has carried, ready to pass it forward. What at first appeared to be a linear act of dominance now unfolds as a vertical act of legacy, a system of descent, reception, and continuation. The ruler is not a sovereign, he is a conduit. Once the dust of observation settles, once the figures, the trench, and the bones are no longer just images and surfaces, but parts of a continuous structure, Yuxtlahuaca ceases to be a site. It becomes a transmission. From the moment the visitor crosses into the cave, they begin a journey through 3 linked registers: the skeletal remains of the dead, the long carved trench, and the painted images at the end. Each appears at first as a discrete layer, body, path, picture, but together they compose a living system of legacy. And legacy, as revealed here, is triadic. First, there is biology. The calcified remains along the corridor are not merely tragic or ceremonial. They are continuity embodied, not buried, but displayed, enduring not as individuals but as markers of the line. They remind us that the passage begins in flesh, in ancestry, in death and descent. Then there is structure. The trench, long and strange, cut deep into the clay, takes on new depth as an architectural symbol. It is the physical representation of the path shaped by intention, a connection that is both literal and symbolic, mirroring the ropes in the painting. And it suggests that patterns, embodied in structure, convey the second element of the legacy, and this leads to the chamber of vision. It is the trail between life and meaning. And finally, there is culture. The images at the end are not stories told for the sake of memory, they are instructions. A god breathes flame, a serpent carries, a man receives and hands forward. The very structure of inheritance is laid bare, not in text or ritual, but in visual syntax. The images teach not only what is passed down, but how, from source, through messenger, into man, and from man to the next. Within the central painting, this structure appears again, this time not in space, but in embodied relation. Behind the great human figure, we now see an ancestor's head, modest but clear, tethered by a thread of shared cloth. At his feet sits the next, the child or student, receiving the trident's shape. The ruler is not a hero, not a conqueror. He is a vessel, inheriting from above, transmitting below, bearing the image of the god and the markings of instruction across his very skin. This is no coincidence of composition. It is a lesson rendered in pigment, a logic of passage laid out in the flesh of the dead, the cut of the earth, and the colours of the wall. And this logic, finally, points to a truth even deeper than ancestry. The message did not begin with the ancestor, nor was it created by the man in the painting. It began with the god, the jaguar who speaks, the serpent who carries. These are not metaphors for imagination. They are representations of revelation, knowledge not invented but received, knowledge that moves, that survives, that demands to be transmitted not just genetically or socially but structurally. And that structure is the trident, not a decoration, not a tool, not a weapon. It is the one thing shown moving from hand to hand, from God to messenger, from man to man, and therefore the only thing in this sequence that qualifies not just as a symbol, but as content. The trident is not what adorns the message, it is the message. Its shape is simple, but its implications are not. 3 points joined by a single base, a unity held in tension by multiplicity. What it offers is not a narrative, but a form. 3 in 1, not a mystic abstraction, but a practical insight into the nature of continuity itself. That nothing stands alone, that every meaning requires a source, a medium, and a recipient. That nothing can be transmitted unless it is first structured, not linearly, but triadically. The cave, from entrance to chamber, reflects this principle. Its stages, biology, structure, culture, do not exist in isolation. They reinforce one another. The bones remain because of the cave's mineral breath. The trench leads only because there is a chamber worth reaching. And the paintings speak only because the viewer has passed through the journey that enables them to hear. So too, within the painting, the triadic principle governs each relation. The ruler, once thought to stand alone, is revealed to be the middle term, held between the weight of his ancestor and the expectation of his successor. He wears the jaguar not to dominate, but to embody the source. He extends the trident not to display it, but to pass it. And the child or student who receives it, seated, small, grounded, becomes the next point in the structure. He will rise, and in turn, he will hand it forward. The shape ensures this. The trident is not simply the record of a system. It is the system, the proof that memory can be made portable, that knowledge can move without language, that a structure once revealed can remain. And what it reveals is this: the inheritance of truth is not by lineage alone. It is carried by form. This is the lesson Yuxtlahuaca offers, not in words, but in relationships rendered in stone. The god who speaks, the serpent who carries, the man who receives, the ancestor behind, the child below, the rope, the road, the trident, all pointing to the same idea. Understanding requires three. And now that we have seen the pattern clearly, now that the trident has been passed to us, the viewers, the readers, the inheritors, we are responsible for following it. But patterns are only validated by repetition. The desert offers no welcome here. Unlike Yuxtlahuaca's descending passage and pigmented warmth, Bir Hema presents nothing but wind-scoured rock and direct light. Its figures are not painted, but carved, cut into the stone with no attempt at illusion or softness. And yet, beneath the severity, the same pattern re-emerges. What we saw expressed in colour and layers is here boiled down to form, and still it speaks. A man stands between figures. A rope connects him. Tridents appear again, precise, deliberate, and now layered with new complexity. The arrangement is not ceremonial. It is structural. There is no story here. There is only logic. Carved into the face of the rock is the dominating figure of the composition. A tall, upright man, his body angular, symmetrical, arms raised and bent at the elbows so that they lift upward on either side of his bowed head. His features are minimal but defined, more geometry than anatomy. He stands not in motion but in balance, every limb a line. In one hand he holds what appears to be a rope, extending outward and downward toward a smaller figure. In the other, faintly inscribed, is a second object, a blade, or the suggestion of one, emerging diagonally and converging with the rope. The two lines meet at his head, forming a perfect triangle over his body. There is no excess, no decoration. He wears no cloak, no crown. And yet he stands in the center of everything, a structure made flesh. Etched in the upper left portion of the rock is what first appears to be an isolated shape, round and indistinct. But viewed in relation to the central man, it resolves itself, a disembodied head, set apart by a deep groove. It is not abstract. Its features are crude but undeniable. A carved smile, two wide eyes, the hint of a brow, and above all, a tall, arched forehead. It is placed not just higher, but above and behind, oriented as if watching the central man, as if waiting for the completion of something begun. A line runs subtly from this head downward, aligned opposite to the rope held by the large man. The head is not an isolated glyph. It is a source, positioned to frame the entire exchange. Its gaze does not rest on the small figure below. It rests on the man in the middle. Beneath the large figure is a smaller human, seated or crouched, his body oriented upward, an arm raised in a gesture long mistaken for veneration. But now this figure resolves into a receiver for the rope through the large man, and his own arm into his outward rope. This figure stands, he processes. He receives what was passed and prepares to send it forward. From the disembodied head to the large man, from the large man to the smaller, the line remains, always continues. This is no mythic tableau. It is a transmission rendered in stone. To the left of the figures stands a trident, classic in form, 3 vertical prongs, evenly spaced, anchored at the base. It is the affirmation, the standard. This is the structure passed at Yuxtlahuaca, now reappearing in harder form. To the right, a second trident, this with the symbol of absence. If the trident on the left is the offered form, this one is its negation. The two symbols stand as the positive and negative poles, and at the center, the large man himself becomes the third trident. His arms are the outer tines lifted high. His head, bowed in alignment with the converging lines of sword and rope, forms the central prong. But here the trident is transformed. His head is not round. It is carved in a chevron, a wedge, a pointer, something directional. The trident becomes a scale, a structure in balance between affirmation and negation. This is not merely the recipient of the message. This is the one who must judge it. The man is no longer just the middle. He is the criterion, the living measure between acceptance and rejection. He does not hold the trident. He is made into it. The circle marker of the second trident begins the final pattern, at the base of the panel, rounded and deliberate. But there is a second circle, the head of the small man, round and carved with care, and follow that path upward, and a third becomes visible. Above the triangle formed by the rope and sword, directly above the bowed head of the central man, is a single impression, shallow but precise, centered atop the pyramid shape. It sits like a seal, a flame, or an eye. 3 eyes, aligned vertically, one beneath negation, one in the receiver, one above the pyramid. This is not decoration. It is geometry made into doctrine. The first eye sees the broken form, the second receives the form again. But the third, above the head of the man who weighs both, looks out. It is the eye, not of man or God, but of structure raised to vision. Not merely sight, but insight, a point beyond duality where judgment stabilizes into understanding. In Yuxtlahuaca, the trident was given. In Birhima, it is judged. Affirmation, negation, balance, each held in form, each watched by the same gaze, moving from image into structure, from structure into awareness. In the northern sands of Saudi Arabia, at the base of a stone outcrop weathered by time and desert wind, the pattern appears once more. This time, not in a cave nor on a sheltered panel, but fully exposed to light, cut into the sandstone wall as if meant not only to be seen, but contemplated. Here at Juba, the structure that had been received at Yuxtlahuaca and judged at Birhima becomes aware of itself. The figures no longer stand in sequence. They begin to interact across time. The central human turns his head. He looks backward, and with that motion, something shifts. This is the moment when awareness enters the structure. Not merely cognition, not reaction, but reflection, a turning toward one's own origins, and, in that act, recognition. Carved at the center of the panel is the tall figure of a man, his body elongated and upright, his stance grounded. His head is not round, but shaped like a chevron or bird's beak, turned backward toward the figures behind him. It is again a geometric form, evocative of the ibis-headed Thoth or other hybrid beings that bridge the divine and the cognitive, and the image can be interpreted as looking back or looking forward. A line curves behind him, once interpreted as a tail, is now recognizable as a rope, tethering him to what came before. In his hand, he holds a second rope, curved and long interpreted as an unstrung bow. But it does not point at prey, it points forward at possibility. And in his head, nestled within the stylized geometry of his crest, a familiar shape reappears, a trident, not held, but contained. The structure once passed hand to hand is now within the mind. What was received, then judged, is now understood. Behind the large man stands a sheep. Its body is detailed with care, but most notably, it is segmented. Across the largest sheep's back run 2 vertical lines, dividing the body into 3 distinct sections. At first, this appears decorative, perhaps a saddle or marking. But when viewed alongside the man's striped garment, a deeper logic becomes visible. The sheep, too, is marked by ropes. It is structured. It does not precede structure. It is part of it. The sheep bears a head whose horns or curvature resemble a trident, a sign that the pattern did not originate with man alone. The trident existed in life, silently encoded in the form of animals, now made visible only because man has turned to see it. They are not mere beasts. They are memory, the biological substrate of the pattern itself. The rope from the man's rear reaches toward them, not as a tool of restraint, but as a line of continuity. He is not leading them, he is evolving from them. Behind the sheep, in a cluster of glyphs, etched faintly but unmistakably, stands a third figure, small and schematic. He has 2 legs, a round head, and a short line drawn across his legs. Once unnoticed, this crossbar reveals itself as an aleph, the first letter, the ox head, the beginning of alphabetic thought. On his left is a trident, pure, minimal, and upright. On his right, a cross of lines and a tiny sheep. The order is striking. The cross is exact and balanced, connection. The sheep is unmistakable, life. Together, these elements do not describe a man. They define a system. Then, pattern, or trident, from God, the man figure, provides connection, the cross, to life, the sheep. And the aleph figure stands in the middle, not as creator or ruler, but as principle, the first ordering glyph, representing the arrival of structure into consciousness. This is not a mythic God. This is Logos personified, rendered in minimal visual language, the first speaker, the first scribe. This is not man receiving structure. This is the divine origin of structured thought. Far to the right, beyond even the extended rope of the central man, is one last mark, a large circle bisected by a vertical line. It stands alone. It is unconnected to the other figures, and yet it is aligned precisely, placed at the terminus of the man's forward gesture. This is the end, not a termination, but a culmination. It is ancient, predating alphabets, but it would later echo in the glyph of Omega, the final character of the Greek alphabet, the symbol of completion. And yet here it is not simply the last glyph. It is the product of the system. The full triad now comes into view. On the left, the aleph figure and glyphs, origin, structure, life. In the middle, the large man, awareness, mediation, reflection. On the right, the final glyph, meaning, language, end. This is no longer a triad of bodies. It is a triad of signs, a system of logic rendered spatially, with roles that move from divine formulation through human recognition to semantic realization. The structure has not only been received, it has been written. And now the entire field comes into focus, not as a scene, but as a page. The elements we once took as symbols now reveal themselves as the first letters, the semantics of cognition. The trident, not just a shape, but a concept, pattern, law, structure. Just as Bet precedes Aleph in the Torah, then the Aleph, first glyph, first principle, the carrier of divine logic. Then the cross, not mere decoration, but the expression of relation, joining opposites, connection between generations. Then the sheep, not just biology, but life, as in the glyph, Chet, the living fence. Then the circle with line, the end, not destruction, but return, Omega before it had a name. These are not random carvings. They are the glyphs of a primordial alphabet, not phonetic yet, but semantic, not meant to sound, but to mean. They do not spell words. They establish categories. They show us how to recognize structure, how to map it, how to bring it into awareness. The trident has now become more than a tool. It has become syntax. In Jubba, man no longer simply receives. He does not merely transmit. He reads, and in doing so, he begins to write.